Now let's talk about the plan and structure of each task, which I introduced in the previous video. First is the mail task, del Prøve 1. You are being expected to answer questions. Usually there are 4 questions. You have to tell, suggest, explain, and comment on a given issue in the questions. You have to write an informal mail, and there is no limit for the number of words you have to write. So you write as much as you think is relevant to answer the questions in the email. It's particularly important to mention that in this task, you need to know how to write in the past tense. Of course, you can formulate your answers to the question in the way that you avoid using past tense, but it's always like an extra point for you if you show that you master it. You can tell a short narrative, or mention something that happened in the past. And the questions in the email task are usually formulated with the focus on present and past, so you are being checked in both tense dimensions. For example, the email task from May 2020, you're writing a reply mail to your friend Christina and giving advice on how her boyfriend Lasse can learn Danish faster. You need to give prognosis, you need to suggest some ideas. Hvad kan jeg gøre, eller hvad kan han gøre for at lære dansk hurtigere, for example. So you can share your experiences, how you learn Danish. Of course, you can make up everything you're writing, and you don't need to tell the truth if you think that, okay, it's too complicated to write my advice, my story. Just to make it up is much easier sometimes, and you can adjust it relevant to the question. And of course, the suggestion about meeting. Hvad synes du, vi skal lave? So you have to suggest an activity you're going to do together. It's an informal writing, so you have to start and finish the email in a proper way. And later in the upcoming videos, I will give you particular sentences of how to do that and give advice on how to make suggestion, explanation, comment, and tell something in the past. The next task is del Prøve 2. It consists of 3 sections. The very first one is when you have to describe statistical information. It can be difference in the current level of something, comparison of the percentage in the population groups related to a particular issue. And then you have to give 2 or 3 detailed and grounded explanation of these statistics. So you choose something in the statistics that you can explain afterwards. It can be a trend, and if you know the reason for this trend, choose then this trend to describe. You don't just make the statements, it's because of that, and that's it, full stop. No, you have to say fordi, for, the end, nemlig, sådan, fordi. So there should be an explicit explanation as well as examples which support your reasoning. In the third section, you have to make assessment or argumentation for or against, or both, if you are, for example, partially supporting the one or the other point of view. It can be formulated in 3 different ways, as I could judge from the exam papers from the previous years. It can be focused on describing advantages or disadvantages of something, or, for example, they're given 2 issues, and you need to explain whether issue A has more impact on the related topic than issue B. Whether, for example, social media is a more considerable stress factor than working life. And the third scenario is when you have a factor, a suggestion or initiative, and you have to evaluate only the one given in this third section as related to the problem, the topic of the exam, the topic of the task. So in all these 3 variations, you need to show what your attitude is. So you need to say, jeg er enig i at. Jeg synes, det er en god idé. Der kan være fordele og ulemper på den ene side og på den anden side. And later in the upcoming videos, I'm going to give you a lot of examples of how to do that. Let's have a look. You have a diagram about different population groups which have different level of stress as they think. So andelen af danskere, som føler sig stresset i dagligdagen, fordelt efter alder og køn. So you say, okay, the women are more stressed than men, and the young people are more stressed than those retired on pension or elderly people, and then you explain why in the second section. The third one is formulated according to B variant. In our previous plan, you have to say whether social media is a more stressing thing than working life. So you have to take an attitude to that, and you don't need to write about advantages and disadvantages of social media, which most people do, unfortunately. The third section should be the longest one. If you write, for example, 24 lines, all in all, then this part should be about 12 lines. So you can say that you will have about 4 lines for the statistics and let's say 8 lines for explaining the reasons. This is the minimum variant, like the very short variant of your argumentational text. If you write 400 words, it does not mean that you will be lucky one and have a good grade. No, it depends on how you formulate, and sometimes shorter texts, but those which are very structured, they receive a higher evaluation. Let's go to the next one. It's del Prøve 2B. The third section is the same as in the previous one. So you see it does not make difference which one to choose. But the first and the second section, they differ from del Prøve 2A. First, you have to tell something you have experienced or someone you know has experienced, or you can make it up. If it's about job searching, then tell something about how you got your job and how your best friend got a job, or make it up. In the second paragraph, because actually you have 3 paragraphs in your writing, you have to comment on 2 or 1. 3 I think is too much because it becomes too long. You need to give a comment on the issue given in the list. You have to say whether you agree or disagree or both. Maybe sometimes you have arguments for and against, whether they are relevant for the issue discussed. And of course, you have to give your examples. So you're not explaining the reasons, but you are commenting on a given issue. Let's have a look. For example, the first job som nyuddannet from May-June 2020. Of course, it makes sense to look on the grades as a factor, but there are other things, right, which can influence the first job after graduation. Frivilligt arbejde eller personligt netværk, blah, blah, blah. You choose 2 of them, for example, and you say how they influence job search. You give a comment on whether they make any difference, whether they have an influence or not. In the third section, you have to evaluate or discuss. Diskutere om personlighed er vigtigere end eksamensresultater, når man skal have et job som nyuddannet. So whether issue A or B is more important for getting the first job. And I would say my general opinion is that it depends on the field you are going to work on. So I would write, it depends in this direction. So before writing, decide what is your general line for argumentation. And remember again, half of your text should be here in the third section. So it's the longest one. So some students may say, okay, I think I am better at describing statistics, so I will prepare del Prøve 2A. But then suddenly during their exam, they have a topic in this Delprøve 2A, which they have never read anything about, or they have never heard anything about. And it's a disaster because you don't have any ideas to write about. So I think it's better to prepare the core sentences, the structures, and some phrases which you can use in all tasks, on all topics, for both tasks. And you choose just the topic you feel better with. Of course, it may depend on how many arguments you have, how your vocabulary is on this or that topic, and maybe even your general knowledge about the issue. So prepare both and choose the one you think you are strongest at.